everybody. Frank is back here to help us talk about a case study that I had with a ballet dancer who got into CrossFit after having her kids. So, the thing about ballet is it's really intense. And when you train ballet and then you stop, you crave something that still gives you that feeling of commitment, intensity, focus. And so, this mom went into CrossFit with that intention, right? So she was going to put in the energy that she is capable of putting out and she has put out into ballet, now moving into CrossFit. And so CrossFit attracted her for many reasons, because it has that intensity, because it has that sense of community, and it has this component of strength which she has not trained before. So in ballet previously, she has been focusing on being flexible and strong in a ballet sense, but when it came to CrossFit, she was definitely interested in building more upper body strength, or being able to move heavy weights like deadlifts, like squats, like being able to throw barbells overhead using, clean snatches and so on. So the barbell lifts really attracted her. She wanted to get a pull up. She wanted to get just a different way of using her body, but still in that intensity. So definitely a lot of commitment. And so when this mom started CrossFit with her ballet training, she definitely committed to it full force. But then she found that she was experiencing aches and pains constantly in her knees and her hips and in her lower back. And then she was also experiencing a ton of stiffness after doing a CrossFit session, and not being able to progress past a certain point. So she was stuck on the same weights, and it seemed like she should have progressed by now with the amount of commitment that she had to the lifts. So, a couple of things we found during her movement assessment. So, I watched her move, and there was a couple of things that we tweaked to help her break through these plateaus and get rid of that pain. So, the first thing, the thing about ballet, and this is something I know very well, having done ballet myself, is that it's all done in turnout. So, you want your feet to be pointing sideways, and so your knees are going to go over your feet. So there's this constant pulling up in the abs, kind of closing this area, and then having your knees go to the sides when you're doing the ballet movement. So it's all done in turnout. So the thing that this mom was doing when she was doing her CrossFit lifts was that she was still kind of turning out secretly in the back. So her initiation of any movement was coming in from squeezing her glutes and from pulling her knees outward, and that put her weight on the outside of her feet. And so that's why I've got my trusty Frank here. So look at our feet here. The feet are full of joints and they actually have, so we think we have one arch, but we actually have three arches in the feet. So there's the big arch that we all know, and then there's a small arch here. It's called the lateral arch, and then there is this arch right here. So your feet actually have an arch right underneath these toes as well. So there's actually three arches in the foot, and the foot is structured in this way for it to absorb force and kind of compress. It needs to be able to move and take the force in when we go in this way and go in this way. And there's a lot of supporting. The way the foot is structured is it is meant to support a variety of activities. So we want the weight of ourselves to be balanced on the foot. So this is what she was lacking. The first thing that we could immediately fix is that she was only using this side of her foot, and this whole foot was coming off, and she was not able to benefit from getting the full support of this medial arch, of this inner arch. So there was just like basically a rigid foot that she was not allowing this foot to move to support her movement. So immediately there was a leak in her movement pattern that we can fix to get her out of pain, to get her using more muscles, and to break through the plateaus of her lifts. So notice too that as I move, let's have this knee bent here. So as I move the foot, if you put the foot on the outside of the outside arch, right, you see what happens to the knee. It starts to rotate. So it starts to rotate this bone, right? So we're kind of like, you can see that the way the foot is built and the ankle is structured is that it allows us, the way the foot positions, it's going to allow us to do some twisting of the leg, right? And so it really depends how we want to move our leg, but there is some play in the knee that can occur when we start moving and twisting this foot. So when she had the foot placement where her arches were rigid and she was on the outside of her feet, that affected the way her knees are responding to the movement. And so her knees were constantly tracking outward. And typically we see people kind of more caving in, but she was trained because of ballet, she was trained to really get out of the, so she never wanted her knees going inward. So she never trained this position. And so notice, if you allow the foot to move inward, it's going to allow the whole leg to go inward, right? So this is called internal rotation that she didn't access at all during her movements, right? So just to demonstrate again, when she's on the outside, her knees are going to track to the outside. Again, from the ballet training, that's what she was accessing, but she was not allowing her knees, when they needed to go a little bit inward, which actually tracks more optimally. And so notice too, if I go into a deeper and deeper squat, this arch starts to flatten. So that is where we're accessing internal rotation. And so she was not allowing this arch to flatten for her leg to go into a more optimal movement pattern. So that affected her hip and her lower back as well. So it was kind of like starting from here, but the chain reaction was going all the way into her lower back because she was constantly rotating this hip outward. So notice here, if you rotate this hip outward with the help of the glutes, you're not able to go through the full range of motion required for a squat or a deadlift, because there is a position and in the squat and the deadlift. So in the squat, you're gonna need to have this arch flatten for you to access the power of the inner thighs of the hamstrings to actually get out of the hole. And this applies to the snatch and the clean. And then on a deadlift, she really liked deadlifting this way, given her movement pattern. She was not comfortable deadlifting the conventional deadlift, again, because coming out of the hole, coming out from the pull, she was unable to access the muscles that she was not used to training in ballet. So this is where we started, is finding all of the bones of the foot and allowing, she had to allow herself to push into this inner arch. The other thing that she was doing, and this is something that a lot of people use, is she had an orthotic. So she had a huge arch support that was already throwing her feet onto the outside. And so that's something that we're kind of told that this is okay and important, but actually our feet have all the strength that we need to support our weight, right? So we don't need orthotics. And the orthotics that she had, they were throwing her feet to the outside and training her to just operate on the edges of her feet. And so she was not accessing her optimal strength, her optimal power here. So that was definitely our first step to figuring out, okay, how do I get you to actually use the whole foot, not just the outside, but use the whole foot, be able to press into here, which will then allow you to bend your knees and your hips in line with each other, and then access, again, internal rotation, your hamstrings, stop over squeezing your glutes to rotate outward and allow the leg to actually track over the toes. The next thing for this particular case that I noticed, that she was really holding her abs and her glutes. And this is something that also I'm very familiar with, having done it myself, is kind of in ballet, you're taught to just really hold this position and not allow your stomach to press out. And that prevents you from breathing. You need to be able to expand downward for the diaphragm to move. And so when in ballet, she's holding this section stiff, this actually stiffens the rib cage. She's only able to breathe out into the side of the rib cage and upward, kind of tensing the neck a little bit, but she was hiding it really well, again, from the training that she had. So it was interesting because when she was trying to lift, she was holding this whole structure really still and squeezing her butt. And that didn't allow, so the diaphragm sits right here. And when you breathe in, it goes down to fill the lungs. And this is something that we sort of don't appreciate enough about our diaphragm, how this structure moves, but it actually is what is going to support our back. We do not need to over squeeze our glutes, and we do not need to tighten our abs to support our lower back. That is actually already taken care of by a proper breathing pattern, by proper breathing mechanics. So her diaphragm, in theory, should move down on the inhale to then expand the ribs, to inhale, to take in the air and to move the pressure. And then on the exhale, it moves up. And that sort of tightens the muscles of the core to stabilize the spine on the exhale. On the inhale, the breath, the air takes care of the pressurization of the stability. And then on the exhale, it's the muscles that activate. So allowing the muscles to dynamically activate was what she was missing for her to then properly brace her core and prevent that back pain from occurring. So she was squeezing the glutes so tight, and she was gripping her abs to keep this area as flat as possible, that she wasn't allowing herself to take in a full breath. And then this area was not pressurizing correctly, and therefore was preventing her from actually accessing more strength and power when she was getting into the heavier movements, heavier lifts, right? So this area needs stability. And there are techniques to stabilize your core, and you've probably seen them where the power lifters and the Olympic lifters are going to go and they kind of pressurize the core. She wasn't there yet to learn that maneuver, the Valsalva maneuver. She wasn't there yet because she needed to allow her muscles to actually activate first and to expand and contract with the breath, for her to then access the natural bracing mechanics of the breath and train that pattern first, to then access the more advanced Valsalva maneuver when you're getting into the really high weight ranges, so to progress further. But to break through the plateau that she was experiencing, she needed to actually let go and figure out how to breathe. So they inhale to set up and the exhale to pull. Those kinds of things is what we had to work on to just literally reteach her how to breathe and connect the breath with her movements, instead of constantly gripping and kind of not allowing the air in, which of course tensed her neck and shoulders a little bit as well. So there was like kind of this chain reaction of just constantly holding the position rather than allowing the position to dynamically expand and contract with the breath, which is really, really important. Again, it's built in to stabilize your spine. That mechanic, that technique, that is already a natural process of how your body stabilizes the spine, allowing the breath to happen. And then finally, she was, when I watched her, the gripping of the glutes, she was externally rotating her legs. So notice what happens here when you kind of externally rotate the legs, they turn out, right? But it was more so that she was squeezing so much here that it was also overburdening this SI joint. So the sacrum is connecting the two pelvic halves, and so there was a lot of tension here constantly held. So she was not allowing this to actually, again, expand and contract from holding the glutes in this external rotation, because she was just used to, from decades of training, to externally rotate her legs. And notice this happens, it has a reaction to the feet. You see the feet turn out when you rotate at the hips, right? So that was fine and great, but she wasn't able to access the parallel position. So that was another thing we worked on, was strengthening positions in parallel. So squatting in parallel was something that she could not activate. She was really uncomfortable for her knees to go forward. She kept going outward, right? So it's more than the feet, it's also coming from the hips. And then when she was doing any sort of hinge movement, her butt was constantly kind of over squeezing and over tightening and pressing into the low back, and it was causing unnecessary tension and pressure. So we had to figure out, again, using the breathing mechanics, how can we actually turn off the over tensing of the glute area and the external rotation, so then we can let her body actually optimally move in those positions and not over grip, over tighten. So her glutes were kind of over firing. And so when she was doing any sort of hip thrust, it was so much pressure right here on the sacrum that she was causing by that constant pulled up action, and it wasn't actually activating the muscles that she needed to access. So it was all sort of a puzzle of figuring out, given her movement pattern that she trained for so many years, how can we then get her to access more optimal, efficient movement patterns in this new endeavor that she's doing, which is CrossFit, barbell lifts, is a particular interest of hers. How can we get her to access those movement patterns in a new way for her? Again, get into this um, more stable position with her feet, access this balance on the whole foot, not just the outer arch, and then find a way to breathe throughout the movement dynamically to actually support her spine, and then get rid of that tension in the glutes and the abs to actually allow the glutes need to expand and then contract to come out of the hole when you squat, and then same deadlift, snatch, all of that. But they need to be able to move. Both they need to be able to stretch and contract to support those movements. And they need to be able to do so dynamically. So she had to almost trust her body to be able to figure it out. So for that, we had to kind of redistribute the pressure and tension that she was causing from that over gripping. So very, very fascinating case. I loved it because, again, I relate to it so much, having gone through, learning the barbell lifts and then going to ballet. So it was a really fun one. Reach out to me for a movement assessment so we can take a look at how you move and how we can access your optimal positioning, your optimal alignment, get your muscles to fire efficiently, and get you out of pain and breaking through your plateaus.